Hello everybody and welcome to this week's wildlife photography video. Now, anybody who's watched my recent videos will know that at the minute I'm in the middle of trying to get some images of badgers, and I have to tell you I'm having real problems with that at the minute. But because of that, I was hoping to bring you a badger video this week, but that's not going to happen. But I've also been really excited to try and get out with a piece of kit that I bought probably 8 weeks ago now, anticipating that I'd have done this video already, but as I say, I've been so busy with what we're trying to get these images of badgers, and then the foxes intervened and I did that video. But I've actually, about 8 weeks ago, I purchased this lens. Now this is a Samyang 100mm f2.8 macro. And I've always done macro photography, and I find that actually in the summer, when a lot of the sort of animals that I'm normally photographing are sort of a little bit quiet after the breeding season, the macro season kicks in and you've got a lot of bugs and insects and even just flowers and things that are really very interesting to take images of. And the thing I like about it is you can probably spend a day in your own garden. You know, even if you've got a garden that's only 5 meters by 5 meters, you can probably spend an awful lot of time in there doing macro photography, because the more you look around, the more that you see, especially at this time of year. So I had, when I was shooting with my Canon 80D, I had an old Sigma 105 macro, and I used to use that an awful lot. And obviously when I got switched completely to Sony, it left me without a macro lens to use. And I had a look at the obvious candidates. So Sony do a 90mm macro, and I think Sigma do a 105 macro, but it's in their art series, I think. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And for that lens, for the Sony, it's like 600 or 700 quid, and I think the Sony 90mm macro is probably around 900 to 1,000. So I'm not sure on prices, but I know they were expensive. Now, one of the advantages that I have with macro is that I've never particularly used autofocus. And one of the things that this Samyang has, and one thing that Samyang are sort of renowned for doing, is doing really, really good glass, but without the electronics. So this 100mm macro lens has no electronic connections whatsoever. But I'm hoping that, as their reputation that I've known from the past, that it's going to be a really high quality piece of glass that's going to allow me to get some lovely macro images. And as I say, no electronics at all, so there's no autofocus. But as I'll show you later, I don't particularly use autofocus anyway when I'm doing macro images. I prefer to manually focus anyway, and there's a couple of ways that I do that. There's also, you know, you choose your aperture with this ring here, so there's no aperture choosing on the back of the camera or anything. Completely manual, but hopefully a lovely piece of glass. Anyway, that's this week's video. I'm going to go up, I'm going to try and do some macro photography. I've travelled up to the old quarry that I use for a lot of my photography, simply because it's quite out of the way. Not a lot of people walk around here. Got a problem with the traffic. I don't know whether you can hear it on this microphone, but the A1 runs up the side. I'll try and minimise that as much as possible, and we'll see if we can get some macro images. And as I say, I'll do a first look at this lens. I will do a full review probably in a couple of months' time when I've had more practice with it, but this is the first time it's been on the camera, so we'll see how we go. Now you probably can't see on this this image, but approximately a metre in front of me I've got a little, I think it's probably a common blue damselfly right at the top of a stalk. And one of my methods for doing this when I'm manually focusing is I'll have an idea of how close I want to get. So say there's something, I don't want to get too close from here because I don't want to disturb it, but say I want to, if I imagine that the damselfly is on top of this bit of vegetation here, what I'll do is I'll pre-focus the lens at that distance. What that enables me to do is basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this hand on the floor in front of me, which will enable me to slide forward with my other hand holding the camera and it basically pressed up against my face, and then I'll gradually get closer and closer to the damselfly. I don't need to touch the focus because I've already pre-focused it until it's actually at the point that I want it to be, and then you'll see the focus peaking hit the damselfly. Because I've got 1, 2, 3 points of contact in with the ground and this in contact with my face, I should be able to keep it fairly steady. What I'm doing at the minute, because I'm not 100% sure with this lens, it's the first time I've used it, I'm using a 400th of a second, which should be fast enough to freeze the action. So it is all a little bit of practice, but I'll just show you what I mean. So the damselfly's in front of me. What I'm going to do, I can see a gap through to it, through the vegetation, so I'm going to put this hand as far in front as I can, get the camera up to my eye, and then I'm going to slide forward towards it. And I've got it there, and then I can fire a couple of shots off and see what they look like. And they look absolutely fantastic. I'm going to try another couple. I'm at F2.8 at the minute, so I've not got much depth of field, so I'll just give it another go. So when you've got a couple of banker shots, you can obviously try and think, right, well, how much closer do I want to get? Do I want to try and fill the frame a little bit more? And so you can refocus perhaps a little bit closer, because you've already got some shots, so if it flies off, you're okay. And we'll give it another go. So I need to have this hand a little bit further in front of me just to get... So this is getting quite dicey because I'm quite close. It's one of those shots where it's either going to stay where it is or it's going to fly off. Pull back out. Take a look what we've got. The detail on those looks absolutely stunning. So that's a really good start. Right, obviously the other form of focusing that most people will be familiar with is just a simple, and say I was trying to focus on something on the top of here, it's just a case of supporting the lens underneath and focusing in on the subject. And then obviously if you want to get a bit closer, you're changing the focus as you get closer to it. And then you take the shot. The problem I have using that sometimes is obviously if I'm moving closer to something, I don't have that support. So I might start at here, and without this hand, say if I'm taking something especially at this level, which often you are doing with macro, I'm completely unbalanced when I start to get close. So not only can that cause you to lose balance with your hands that's holding the camera, but you can also lose the balance that you've got actually to stay in that position and not fall forward. So I often find that to have a hand that I can put down on the floor to steady myself and then pre-focus where I want it to is much easier. But you know, both of them have the merits and I use both, so don't don't be afraid to try either. Just really what works for you. Right, I suppose while we're out here taking a first look at this lens, I could give you a couple of my tips for macro photography really. So if we talk about weather for a start and time of day, often sort of first thing in the morning and last thing at night in the afternoon are good, because one, you tend to get a more calmness. So yeah, if it's going to be windy, the wind doesn't tend to pick up. You know, that first bit of time in the morning, it tends to be quite, or it can be quite calm. And obviously what you want when you're taking, you know, images of macro insects or whatever, you don't want them on a plant that's waving about all over the place. So as calm a day as you can get, you know, really the better. What I'd also say as well is I love, and I think it's better, if you can get days that are bright, but not necessarily direct sunlight. So you've got a thin sheet of cloud that's covering the sun, but it's a really bright day. They're ideal conditions, because what you don't want is any harsh shadows. So, you know, if you've got sort of really bright conditions, that means you can get quite a low ISO and, you know, a nice fast shutter speed, but you've not got those shadows, then that's ideal. So you're often looking for those really bright days with no direct sun. And what I'd also say is that something that a lot of people neglect when they're doing macro photography is your background. You know, really, it's as important as when you're doing, you know, wildlife photography or landscape photography, is look at the things around the thing that you're taking a picture of. Are there any distractions? Are there anything cutting across? Is there anything in the background that when you take the image is going to provide a bigger line across the back that's going to draw your viewer's eye away from your subject? So, you know, if you can, I actually sometimes, like if you imagine a situation where I've got a bush full of flowers and there's butterflies landing on it, the temptation is to chase round after a particular butterfly and wait for it, and oh, it's gone onto that one, and move around to try and get it on that one. What I'll often do is look for the bloom that's the most attractive, that's got the best background, there's nothing behind it, and then I'll just set up and wait for the butterflies to come to that particular flower. Obviously, you know, it does take a little bit more time, but if you do that, you'll often get a better image than you would by just chasing around randomly after a butterfly on a bush that's full of flowers. And you know, eventually it'll land on the one that's got the best background, but you know, you're not prepared to wait for that, so you're just chasing it around. So yeah, there are a few quick tips. Look out for the best sort of weather, time of day. I know a lot of people, I took a picture of a damselfly earlier, a lot of people like to get those images of damselflies and dragonflies when they've got the droplets of dew on them. Obviously for that, you need to be out early in the morning. And if you check a reed bed or anything like that at this time of year, early in the morning, you'll often find things like dragonflies and damselflies just rested on those, covered in dew. As well as that, it's the best time to approach them because they're not going to move, whereas if it's in the middle of the day, they're more active, they're moving around. So yeah, they're my a few tips to keep you going. I'll probably do a whole video on macro photography as well as a review on this lens, so we'll get into that in a lot more detail, but I just thought it was useful. Anybody out there who's got a macro lens and not really used it and you know, wants to get into using it, there are a few tips that will get you started. And as I say, we'll do a deeper dive into it on another day. Right, well that's my first foray out with the Sony A6400 and this Samyang 100mm f2.8 macro lens. I have to say, I've not found any particular problems with it. I think because you've done away with all the electronics, it's quite a simple lens to use. And if you've got, you know, your tried and tested techniques that you've been using for years, you know, you just really get on with it and get stuck into it. And you know, it's really easy just to use this lens. As I say, no electronics in it at all, so you are basically in charge of getting the focus. I've explained the two methods that I use that I find quite useful. and hopefully you'll be able to see that with the images at the end of this this video and see for yourself. As I say, this is not a definitive review because this is the first time I've used it on this camera, on any camera at all actually. I've had it for 6 to 8 weeks and it's the first time it's been on it, so really impressed with the images that I've seen on the back of the camera. I'll get them back into some processing software and then we'll see what they look like then, and as I say, I'll stick them up in the gallery at the end. So I will do a definitive review of this lens when I've used it quite a lot. But as I said, there's not an awful lot to go wrong with it because there's no electronics, and if the optics are working well, then yeah, you shouldn't really have a problem. And as I say, it looks to me from f2.8 all the way through that it's pretty sharp. I mean, I only generally use from f2.8 to about f8, f11, and it looks really pretty good all the way through. There's no drop off at any point that I can see. But as I say, I need to really do more testing with it first. So yeah, if anybody's out there obviously looking for a macro lens or wants to dip the toe into macro photography with the Sony A6400 or any of the crop sensor Sony cameras, then this may well be a viable option, and obviously quite a lot cheaper than going for a Sony 90mm macro. Anyway, I'm going to do a little bit more, hopefully avoid the horse flies, and yeah, I'll put all the images up I've taken today that you've not yet seen at the end of this video. As always, if you've enjoyed this video, then please give it a thumbs up. For those of you who've not subscribed to the channel, then please think about subscribing, and I will see you next week for another video. Cheers, bye.